There is a moment on June 16, 1967, that changed the sound of American music forever. A 35-year-old music industry lawyer, a man who had spent most of his career in boardrooms and courtrooms rather than concert halls, drove to Monterey, California for a music festival his friends had convinced him to attend. He had never seen anything like what was on that stage. A generation of musicians he barely knew existed, playing to audiences who were completely electrified. And then a woman stepped up to the microphone, a raw, howling, physically overwhelming singer named Janis Joplin, fronting a band called Big Brother and the Holding Company. The lawyer watched her for 30 seconds, and in the span of those 30 seconds, he understood something that nobody else in the business had quite understood yet. The entire landscape of popular music was changing, and whoever moved first would define the next decade. He signed her the next morning. His name was Clive Davis. He was the new president of Columbia Records. And that moment at Monterey was the first note of a 60-year symphony that would touch the lives of more people than almost any single figure in the history of the music business. On Monday, June 22, 2026, Clive Davis passed away peacefully at his home in Manhattan. He was 94 years old. And the music world he leaves behind is, in the truest possible sense, a world he built. Clive J. Davis was born on April 4, 1932, in Brooklyn, New York, into a middle-class Jewish family. His childhood was marked by early loss. His father died when Davis was young, followed shortly by his mother. He was largely raised by relatives and worked his way through school on scholarship, eventually graduating from New York University and then Harvard Law School. He was, by training, a lawyer, not a musician, not a producer, not someone who had grown up obsessed with records or spent his teenage years in record stores. He was a lawyer who joined CBS's legal department in 1960, worked his way up through the corporate structure with quiet efficiency, and in 1967, at 35 years old, was appointed president of Columbia Records. The appointment was, by his own account, unexpected. He had no deep background in the creative side of the music business, but he had two things that would turn out to matter more than any technical music knowledge: an extraordinary pair of ears, and the willingness to follow what those ears told him regardless of what the industry consensus said. The Monterey Pop Festival was the first proof of both. He came back from Monterey with Janis Joplin under contract and a completely transformed understanding of where American music was going. Within the next few years, Columbia under Davis would sign Santana, Aerosmith, Billy Joel, Earth, Wind & Fire, and a 22-year-old kid from New Jersey named Bruce Springsteen, who nobody outside the Northeast had ever heard of. Davis later said of Springsteen that he heard something in those early recordings that he simply knew was extraordinary, even when almost nobody else agreed with him. That instinct, not analysis, not committee decisions, not market research, just instinct, was the thing that defined his entire career, from first note to last. In 1973, Clive Davis was fired from Columbia Records. The circumstances were murky and, as Davis maintained for the rest of his life, largely fabricated. A disgruntled executive accused him of billing the company for personal expenses, including a bar mitzvah and a Beverly Hills home. Davis denied the charges vigorously, and while he pleaded guilty to a single minor count of tax evasion and paid a $10,000 fine, he was ultimately exonerated of the more serious allegations. The man who had made the accusations later went to prison for his own fraud. The firing, in other words, was built on a lie, but in the short term, it cost Davis one of the most powerful jobs in the music industry. What it couldn't do was take away his ears, or his ambition. In 1974, Davis founded Arista Records, named after the Honor Society for New York City's public school overachievers, of which he had been a member as a young man. He started, in his own words, from scratch. No catalog, no roster, no infrastructure. Just a deal with Columbia Pictures worth $1 million, a brand new imprint, and the same extraordinary ability to hear what other people couldn't. Within 2 years of founding Arista, Davis had signed Patti Smith, whose debut album Horses remains one of the most important records in the history of punk and alternative music. He signed Lou Reed, he signed the Grateful Dead, he found Barry Manilow languishing after a failed debut album and handed him a song called Mandy, which went to #1 and launched one of the most successful pop careers of the decade. He signed Dionne Warwick and revitalized a career that had stalled. He was starting over, and he was winning. In 1983, at a nightclub in New York City, Clive Davis watched a teenager sing. She was there performing alongside her mother, gospel legend Cissy Houston. She was 19 years old, she had not released an album, she was not famous. She was a girl from East Orange, New Jersey, who could sing in a way that, by all accounts, stopped a room cold from the first note. Davis signed Whitney Houston to Arista Records that night. What followed is one of the most extraordinary partnerships in the history of popular music. Davis didn't just sign Houston, he devoted years to developing her, to selecting the right material, to shaping the presentation of her talent in a way that would allow her to reach the widest possible audience without compromising the raw power of what she had. Her 1985 self-titled debut album went to #1 and stayed there for 14 weeks. 3 of its singles reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. She became, under Davis's guidance, one of the best-selling artists in the history of recorded music. And their relationship extended far beyond the business of making records. Davis was a genuine father figure to Houston. He said so publicly, and the people around her confirmed it privately. When she struggled, in the years before her death, he was one of the few people she trusted completely. She died in February 2012, the night before Davis's legendary annual pre-Grammy party, which he chose to hold anyway, in her honor, in a decision that was widely debated and widely understood to be exactly the kind of thing she would have wanted. Davis later served as a producer on the 2022 Houston biopic I Wanna Dance With Somebody, in which he was portrayed by Stanley Tucci, a final act of guardianship over the story of the woman he had discovered and loved for 30 years. What makes Clive Davis's story different from most music industry legends is the duration of the success. Most executives who reshape popular music do so in a particular era. They read the room perfectly in the 60s, or the 70s, or the 80s, and then the cultural landscape shifts and the magic doesn't transfer. Davis's magic transferred again and again across 6 decades. In 1999, when Davis was 67 years old, he conceived one of the most audacious ideas in the history of the album format. He took Carlos Santana, a guitar legend whose commercial peak had been in the early 1970s, and paired him with a roster of the hottest young artists of the late 90s: Rob Thomas, Lauryn Hill, Dave Matthews, Wyclef Jean. The resulting album, Supernatural, won 8 Grammy Awards and gave Santana bigger commercial success than he had ever enjoyed at any previous point in his 5-decade career. It was certified 15 times platinum. Davis was 67 years old and he was still finding new ways to hear the future. When he founded J Records in 2000, his third label from scratch, one of his first signings was a 20-year-old singer-songwriter from New York City named Alicia Keys. Keys' debut album Songs in a Minor sold over 12 million copies worldwide. She won 5 Grammy Awards at the 2002 ceremony, still one of the best single-night Grammy performances by any debut artist in history. And then, in 2006, Davis was intimately involved in the release of Kelly Clarkson's Breakaway, the album that transformed the first American Idol winner into a genuine global pop star. It won the Grammy for Best Pop Vocal Album. By this point, he was in his 70s, still finding hits, still hearing things nobody else could hear. His annual pre-Grammy party, held each year on the eve of the ceremony, became the most coveted invitation in the music business. Not because of the guest list, though the guest list was extraordinary, because of what it represented. A man who had spent 6 decades at the absolute center of popular music, still there, still engaged, still connecting people, still celebrating the thing he loved more than anything else in the world. In 2026, he celebrated the 50th edition of that party. When the news of Clive Davis's passing broke on June 22, 2026, the tributes came from virtually every corner of the music world, and together they painted a picture of a man whose influence was so broad, so deep, and so genuinely personal that almost no one in 50 years of popular music had been untouched by him. Barry Manilow, whose entire career had been built in part on Davis's belief in him, wrote, "For 50 years we worked together, created together, argued together, and celebrated together. Yes, some would say it was business. But to Clive, it never was. It was family." He closed with 4 words that carry more weight than most long tributes. "Thank you, Clive. I wish we could do it all again." Bruce Springsteen said Davis had changed his life at 22 years old by signing him to Columbia Records, and that Davis had treated him with the same respect and kindness as an unknown nobody as he did after all his success. Coming from Springsteen, who does not traffic in empty sentiment, that observation about consistent respect, no more, no less, regardless of your current commercial value, says everything about the kind of executive Davis was. Carlos Santana praised him as a visionary who could hear the intangible before anyone else could see it. Dionne Warwick celebrated his magical ability to spot a hit record. Patti Smith thanked him publicly for believing in her and shepherding her work across a half-century. Alicia Keys called him a visionary who transformed dreams into reality. Diane Warren, one of the most successful songwriters in pop history, said losing him felt like losing a father figure. And former President Barack Obama, in a video message at Davis's pre-Grammy party years earlier, put it as simply as anyone, Clive's talent has always been seeing and hearing what other people don't. Here is the detail about Clive Davis that I keep coming back to. He started from nothing. He was an orphan. He put himself through school on scholarships. He built himself into the president of one of the most powerful record labels in the world through sheer intelligence and work ethic, and then he lost it. Suddenly, because someone else lied. And instead of retreating, instead of accepting the verdict that the world had rendered, he went back to a desk in a new building with a new company name and started over. At 42 years old. And then he did it again. And then he did it again. By the time he died at 94, he had spent 66 years in the music business. He had signed and championed artists across at least 6 distinct eras of popular music, each one different from the last. Each one requiring new instincts, new ears, new willingness to hear something that the market hadn't yet confirmed was worth hearing. His family said he understood that great music was never simply about laughter or entertainment. It was about humanity, connection, and truth. That is what he spent 66 years looking for. And the extraordinary thing is how often he found it. Rest in peace, Clive Davis. The soundtrack of all our lives has your fingerprints all over it. If Clive Davis discovered, produced, or championed music that matters to you, drop it in the comments. Let's celebrate what he built. Take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one.